there has been a massive breakthrough that has happened in the Middle East in the war between Israel and Hamas terrorist organization. There has been a truce deal that has finally been struck between both these parties, in wake of which Israel has decided to allow for a 4-day ceasefire in exchange for 50 hostages to be returned by the Hamas terrorist organization. It has also mentioned that every single additional day that it allows for a ceasefire, 10 hostages will be released by Hamas. Now, what are the impacts that this deal is going to have in the Middle East and the larger sphere of geopolitics? I'm going to discuss this with my panelists. On the telecast with me is Ambassador Daniel Carmen. He is a former diplomat joining me from Israel. Ambassador Daniel, the situation has seen a breakthrough at last. There were a number of negotiations that were being carried out, with Qatar and Egypt being the mediators in this long-drawn negotiation, which finally has seen the end of the tunnel. What is going to be the impact here in terms of Israel? Is the world now going to question? Is this the beginning of the end of the war that Israel had started off against the Hamas?
Well, let me take your last words into perspective. Israel did not start a war with Hamas. What happened on the Black Saturday, October 7th, was a flagrant attack by a terrorist organization that entered the territory of my country, occupied for hours 20 or so localities in the southern part of our country, butchered, massacred residents in their homes, in their beds, attacked a peace festival nearby where 3,000 or 4,000 youngsters were celebrating, and massacred 360 of them. 1,400 people were massacred. 240 Israelis and foreigners were kidnapped into the territory of Gaza.
Right.
And this is the war. This is the war that was waged upon Israel. And as any sovereign country would do, Israel has retaliated. Israel has done what it should be doing in a war. In a war, you act like in a war. But this is a very unprecedented event, tragic event. The 240 hostages whose whereabouts are not known, the conditions are not known. The Red Cross did not receive access to the poor people, 36 or 38 kids, some of them without their parents,
right,
are kidnapped. This is war, and if you ask me, is this the beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel? My answer is no. It is the beginning of one of the most important priorities of this war, is to get the 236 kidnapped and missing back home to their families, to their parents. This is the stage we're in now.
Okay. You know, a lot of Arab nations and the world at large had been demanding that there needs to be a ceasefire at last. There is a humanitarian crisis where a number of Palestinians are dying, and there have been medical supplies, there has been electricity that initially had been stopped, which is now being provided to the Palestinians. There is northern part of Gaza has been completely evacuated. In a situation such as this, has Israel now decided to have a more diplomatic approach in being able to get back the hostages, also in wake of what the West has been talking about? Has there been pressure on the Israeli side to agree to this ceasefire?
The Western world, as you called it, and we're talking mainly about the United States, but it's not only the United States, understand the right of Israel for self-defense and understand the policy of Israel, the declared policy to fight Hamas until it is detached from its military capabilities, finally, after so many years of terrorism and inflicting its vision, its terrible vision, religious vision against our country. So part, as I said before, the priority in this very, very special and unique situation, the priority has been and is to have our people back. But the war against Hamas is not over.
Okay. Okay. Joining me also on the telecast is Professor Madan Alapat. You've heard it from Ambassador Carmon. The war is still not over. There is a ceasefire because there is urgency in rescuing these hostages. Several of them from different parts of the world, including Europe and United States of America. Do you think there has been a conceited effort by several Islamist nations and terrorist groups to allow for some sort of a normalization of ties between Israel and the other moderate Arab nations? And with the ceasefire that has now been negotiated, there are still voices of dissent, particularly from Iraq, from Syria, from Iran, as well as these terrorist organizations that are given safe havens in these Islamist nations, who are again questioning the ceasefire. So they are condemning this ceasefire. They are condemning the fact that the release of the hostages is now going to happen from the Hamas side. Again, primarily reaching the consensus that these Islamist nations are in no way wanting Israel to live a peaceful existence in the Middle Eastern region.
Well, I'd like to agree completely with what Ambassador Carmon has said. And I'd like to say that Israel is a fact of life. And because of the suffering that the Jewish people endured over more than 1,500 years, and frankly, the last century was possibly the worst period of suffering of the Jewish community, they're entitled to come back to their ancestral homeland, and that homeland is Israel. There's no question about it. Nobody can deny the right of the people of Israel to have the state of Israel, which is a refuge for a community that's been persecuted for, as I said, over 1,500 years. Having said that, it's also the right of the Palestinians to have a Palestinian state. So you have a two-state solution. And frankly, I warmly welcome this humanitarian pause. I would not call it a ceasefire. And I quite agree with the ambassador, there's no question of a ceasefire until this problem of terrorism is dealt with once and for all. But it's a humanitarian pause. And the fact is that, women and children and the elderly especially, they are most at risk from perishing at the hands of Hamas, which, as you correctly said, is a 100% terror organization. So I think that the Israeli government has done a good thing in having this humanitarian pause so that these most vulnerable of these hostages will be able to come back to safety. I think it's a very good thing to do. And I would also like to say, Megha, it indicates the desperation of Hamas. Hamas, frankly, had no concept of what they were coming up against when they launched that dastardly terror attack against Israel, helped by, if I may say so, some very powerful countries. Of course, they've been helped by some countries in the neighborhood, not just Iran, frankly, which is doing it more or less openly. But there are countries that are helping them not so clandestinely. And frankly, they're providing funds to them. But the fact is, the fact that they had to agree to release these most, if I may say so, at risk of severe, health conditions, hostages, indicates that Hamas is desperate for an exit route. Absolutely. They have been battered, totally battered. And that is why they have agreed to do this. And in exchange, what have we got? In the case of Gilad Shalit, it was 1,000 to 1. One Israeli, 1,000 prisoners of Israel. Yeah. Today it is 10 to 1. Quite a big difference between 1,000 to 1 and 10 to 1. Hamas has been forced to agree, and they will try to keep the pressure to make this a permanent pause and to make it a longer ceasefire. But I don't believe the IDF is going to relent. I think, as Ambassador Carmon very correctly said, this problem has to be dealt with. India has been facing terror and much of the world, frankly, told India, why, you ceasefire, don't create a problem, don't go after terrorists. Now they've stopped lecturing India, thank God. Now they started to lecture Israel. But the reality is, the world, if it is to be free from terror, terror has to be eliminated everywhere in the world.
Okay. I also have with me another Israeli voice, Aaron Levarko, joining me on the telecast right now in this debate. He's served in the Israeli Defense Forces for 9 years. He's a retired sergeant now. Now, Aaron, how do you view the situation in the Middle East geopolitically, particularly when the Arab nations now reach out first to Beijing and now they are going to be arriving in Delhi? They will also be traveling to Moscow. Is there a tilt with regards to who they are seeking help as mediators in this conflict that has gone on since 7th of October?
One of the problems with a weak America is that we've had a number of other nations that have stepped up to be the mediator. We had China for a while, and now we have Qatar. Qatar are one of the, if not the number one, biggest sponsors of terror in the world, and they are our mediator. Turkey said that they want to be involved in the mediation as well. Part of it is that they will get some kind of glory from being the mediator. But make no mistake, we know the nature of these mediators. We know what their goals are. The problem is Israel doesn't have much of a choice right now. We are in a bad situation because we have our boys and girls and grandmothers and babies in the hands of animals, so we don't really have a choice.
Okay, but Aaron, do you think Israel would rather be satisfied and rather be proactive when it comes to China, Russia and India being at the negotiating table and acting as mediators? The Arab nations seem to think in that line.
Let's see what kind of mediating they do. You judge people by their fruits, okay? So if the Qataris can deliver, then great. If the Chinese can deliver, also great. Let's see who steps up, what kind of mediating they do. In the meantime, we are in a bad situation. So I at this stage, when it comes to getting our captives back, we'll do anything, and we're open to I wouldn't say anything, but like I said, we're in a bad situation when our sons and daughters have been kidnapped.
Okay. Pramit Pal also on the telecast with me. Now, Pramit, an important question that has been raised by Israel towards India, the government of India, in wake of the 26/11 and its 15th anniversary, Israel has now designated Lashkar-e-Toiba, based out of Pakistan, as a terrorist organization. It has sought a similar response from India when it comes to the Hamas terrorists. What is the hiccup that India is facing in designating Hamas as a terrorist organization, keeping in mind India has been very vocal to fight global terrorism, joining hands with other democratic nations across the globe?
So India's policy on blacklisting terrorists is very clear. The law that India has, the UAPA, lists, basically you're allowed to list, or normally we designate terrorist groups that have attacked India, have targeted Indian interests or India. So if you look at the list that's there of the 20 or so organizations, most of them are Pakistani-sponsored ones that have attacked India, or even some Khalistani groups and so on. Most of them are South Asia-based, obviously, and a handful, for example, function in places like Canada, but they've always targeted India. We don't designate terrorist groups, even if we think of them as terrorists or call them terrorist groups. We don't blacklist them unless they attack India. Israel has a very similar policy. While they have very conveniently declared Lashkar just a few days ago as a terrorist organization, the fact is that Israel did not consider or did not designate it officially as a terrorist organization, though it has been in existence and been attacking India for over 2 decades now, because of the same reason. It did not directly ever attack Israeli interests. India had no problems with that. The question for India, though, is we assume that this is part of a larger diplomatic attempt by Israel to get more and more governments to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. I fully understand why Israel is doing that, but given that it is an act of convenience rather than an act, should we say, of commitment on terrorism, I think India will weigh its options and will have to determine whether legally India actually has such a capacity. India tends to urge for the blacklisting of terrorist organizations under the UN blacklist, because that actually brings in genuine action under the Foreign Affairs, FATF, Financial Affairs Task Force, and various other international organizations. And that's where we have tended to act. I would say that India probably would resist designating Hamas a terrorist organization legally, partly because it doesn't have any impact. India doesn't have any capacities. But as I've said, it's a little too convenient for us to go down that path right now. What we prefer how it continues publicly and officially by the Indian Foreign Ministry to call Hamas and its actions terrorist. And of course, India does not support Hamas in any way and has been a strong and continues to be a strong supporter, along with the US, of Israel's position in the war. But that's a different, it's both a legal and a diplomatic game, and I don't know right now whether India feels it should be going down that path.
Okay. Pramit, again, the same question to you, that the Arab delegation is going to be arriving in India as well this week. They have just finished their tour in Beijing. It is also very amply clear that while the West had made these grand overtures with the US President Joe Biden arriving in Israel, it was his US State of Secretary Antony Blinken who was also in Israel just a few weeks ago. The US Foreign Secretary also made a visit to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem. Then we also saw that France had sent out its delegates to arrive in Israel during this very conflicting time. But such visits were not seen from the global south. The important nations that matter, whether it is China or India, or for that matter, in East Europe, it is Russia. Is this also the reason why they want to build an association and open lines of communications which transcend this dialogues of condemnation that have come in, but not really actualized into the heads of the states, or at least their representatives, then arriving in Israel in solidarity with the country?
Most of the emerging economies or emerging powers or middle powers, whatever you want to call them, their basic foreign policy posture remains that unless our direct interests are involved, we do not put political capital on the ground. So you've seen that the BRICS countries, or for example, all of them have avoided going to Ukraine. Well, Russia, for obvious reasons, is not interested. But none of us, India, has bothered to go to Ukraine, even no matter what we think of the Ukraine conflict. There are many conflicts around the world. Middle powers are very, very cautious. They don't see themselves as superpowers. They do not see themselves as great powers. India, for example, officially never calls itself calls itself an aspiring term, because India is very careful in committing itself diplomatically or politically into what it does. And I think that is a perfectly sensible action. India is not yet at the stage where it can get itself involved in peace negotiations and so on. It doesn't have that capacity and doesn't have the clout yet or influence to do so. So, but India has supported Israel rhetorically and in other ways. And it is also it knows that Israel has helped us even tangibly in some of our wars, especially in the Kargil war, for example. And we are indirect supporters of Israel because we are the world's largest buyers of Israeli weapons, and we help support the military complex of Israel. and are very clear that Hamas that while we support the Palestinian nationalism, we do not support the version of nationalism that is represented by Hamas.
Okay. Ambassador Daniel Cameron, then the big question continues to be in the minds of the world that when is this war going to end? And obviously there are conflicting voices that are in support of the Palestinians who are getting killed, and they are innocent people. So why has the narrative suddenly turned against Israel and its onslaught on the Hamas terrorism, and the collateral damage being the Palestinians?
May I before comment a little bit, just very shortly about things that were said before here. China was never a candidate to be a mediator. China has taken sides in a very clear way from the beginning, and I can tell you that from various perspectives. And unfortunately, Russia also, I would not, if Russia would have negotiated or mediated and brought any good results, this is something else, but I don't think they even tried. Qatar is not, I would not paint Qatar in any nice colors, and they're definitely supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, etc. But they bring results, and it's not the first time that Qatar is mediating, enjoying all worlds. Qatar is enjoying all worlds from this perspective and the other perspective, and they should be congratulated for bringing results without ignoring their negative role in supporting terrorist organizations. I must stress again that this war is not against the Palestinians. This war is against an organization within the Palestinian people that has taken steps even against the Palestinian Authority many years ago when they threw them out of the Gaza Strip in a apparent coup d'etat, a violent coup d'etat. And they took strength in what they say is a mix of political and military force. And we saw on the October 7th tragedy and attack that they were very well trained, very well equipped, and surprised Israel in what is one of the darkest days and darkest periods of the modern state of Israel. But we will prevail. There is no doubt about it. And I think that the declared aim of the government of Israel, supported by a large majority in Israel, is when will the war end? It will end when Hamas is out of its military capability as a terrorist organization, symbolizing more than just themselves, symbolizing a clash between civilizations, a clash between the moderate and the extremists. And it's something that should worry not only the Israelis, but the rest of the world, both in Europe and in, I must say, in Asia too.
Okay, fair enough. Quickly, a quick response from you, Professor Nalapat, in terms of, an important aspect that has been raised by Ambassador Carmon about Qatar being the negotiator, the mediator, and reluctantly it has been acceptance that has been shown by Israel in having these mediation talks with Qatar at the center of things. But could there have been an alternative that could have been found in a Middle Eastern country, barring Qatar, who had the strength and the efficiency to hold these negotiation talks?
Look, the fact is that whether it's the United Arab Emirates, whether it is Kuwait, whether it is Bahrain, whether it's Oman, whether it is Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman, they have all understood that the future does not lie in Wahhabism, does not lie in extremism, and frankly, does not lie in Khomeinism either. Iran should go back to a pre-Khomeini situation societally. I'm not talking of in terms of government. But the reality is, Qatar is an outlier. Qatar is still clinging to Wahhabism. I think finally the Qatar royal family will understand it has made a wrong bargain, and it will finally, they will understand the consequence of that. But yes, the fact is, as the ambassador pointed out, the Qataris are very close to Hamas. They have extensive linkages with the Hamas leadership. 28 of the top Hamas leaders live very comfortably in Qatar. So if they would be the ideal people to negotiate this kind of a humanitarian pause for this humanitarian, basically return of the most disadvantaged hostages back to Israel. So
Absolutely.
from that point of view, Qatar has done something good. And yes, we have to appreciate it. The royal family of Qatar is making a huge mistake in not following Mohammed bin Salman, in abandoning Wahhabism. But let's hope they wake up to that sometime soon.
Ron, then in terms of the Middle Eastern politics, where Qatar stands right in the middle, and then also, leaning towards this axis that has been created, which includes Iran and Russia and China to a certain extent, and there is then Syria and Iraq and Yemen that are also part of this force. Where does Israel lie in a situation? Also, with the moderate Arab nations supporting Israel in holding peace talks and the peaceful existence that the country has been seeking ever since its existence.
It's a bit too early to tell. I don't think the dust has settled yet, but I believe countries like Saudi Arabia are waiting to see. On one minute they are talking about joining in the Abraham peace agreements. The next minute they are condemning Israel and fighting for the Palestinian cause. It's a little bit too early, but definitely there's an alliance, a growing alliance with, of course, Turkey, with Russia, with China, and even North Korea to some degree. And actually, if I could just respond to Daniel as he called me out, actually China, 2 times before this war began, they were called upon and they even offered to mediate the situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I was referring to the vacuum that the United States created by not stepping into the situation. And so anything can happen. We're waiting to see. But I do believe that once the dust has settled, and we don't know how long this is going to take, this war, I think it's going to be at least 3 to 6 months at least.
Okay.
We're also waiting to see what happens up on our northern border. That's in some ways even more of a danger, more of a threat, more of an existential threat. Anything can happen. Anything can break out at any time. All kinds of potential scenarios.
Okay.
We're on edge here. It's a very stressful, painful time for our nation. Very painful.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Pramit, then quickly a word from you. Where does India stand in this Middle Eastern crisis? Is this also the reason why India is shy of diving deep into this crisis?
Well, I think we're starting to see the beginnings of a new Middle Eastern policy by India. The fact that you have these Arab foreign ministers who I believe are doing a tour of the P5 governments, but have added P5 plus India. In other words, India is the 6th country and is not a Security Council permanent member that has been added to the list. I think that is a sign of our growing relationship. We've already have one with Israel. We have reasonably good relations with Iran, at least diplomatically. But now our relationship with the United Arab Emirates and increasingly with Saudi Arabia are also being transformed. So we're starting to see a lot of these countries look to India in a different way. India, however, is stretched, and it is stretched because its overwhelming strategic priority is the threat that it sees from China, which is not a small country to deal with. And therefore, I would say 80% of all our resources are now committed to tackling China on a whole host of fronts in the so-called Indo-Pacific. So the Middle East is an area that we are becoming more and more involved, but it is an area that it would be difficult, given the resources that India has right now, to commit beyond a certain point.
Okay. All right. I only have as much time to discuss this very important, sensitive issue that is emanating out of Middle East, and particularly the impact it has on India. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.